Welcome back to another episode of the 6Ps podcast. And today we're going to focus on essay writing. We're going to break this up into two parts. Today we're just going to focus on the task itself and how to approach that. And then in the next video, we'll look at a sample topic and discuss ways to go about approaching that. So let's start with the basics of essay writing. And this is, of course, a comparative essay, and when you look at the criteria, you will see that it is so important. We're aiming to write between 900 and 1200 words approximately. Now, this will be slightly longer than, say, a text response essay, but of course, you do have the fortune of dealing with two texts here. So in terms of length, I wouldn't be too worried about that because you've got a lot of evidence to draw upon from both your text, and in our case, that is, of course, the Crucible and the Dressmaker. It's worth 60 of the 70 marks for Unit 4 this year in 2020. Of course, previously, of course, it was worth 60 out of 100 marks. Not too sure what 2021 will look like, of course. It is worth a third of your exam mark as well. So overall, particularly this year in 2020, the comparative is worth, well, over 33% of your overall mark. So looking at the rubric provided by VCAA, and as previously mentioned, 3 of the 4 do mention the word comparison or comparative, so that's going to be really important. The first section is really focusing on your knowledge of the texts and the perspectives they provide. So here we're definitely looking at things like context. And for the Crucible, which has a dual context, this is going to be really important for you to discuss somewhere in your essay, so you can tick this off. The second section is really focusing on the comparison of, ideas, issues, and themes. Please make note of the fact that similarities and differences are mentioned in here, and I think that's something that we can often forget is to mention differences. So just remember that. Look too at the use of evidence. So in the medium band, we're looking at a suitable use of evidence, but to get in the very high band, you really need that considered use of evidence. And again, we're looking for those more unique perspectives and students that are actually being very selective with what quotations and what linguistic features they are looking at. The third section, of course, is based on your structure and your ability to write a comparative analysis. Again, we're ensuring that we're being really balanced in the weight of the two texts and also thinking about using that comparative language, which segues in nicely to the last section, which should look pretty common to you. It's in pretty much all of the SACs for this year. It's your written language and your ability to write in an expressive and fluent manner. And of course, using that really complex and sophisticated vocabulary to ensure that you are impressing both your marker, but also the examiner at the end of the year. Speaking of the exam at the end of the year, let's have a think about what VCAA say. And of course, if you haven't already, those of you who are exclusive subscribers, you'll be able to get that video that we released last week where we spoke to a former VCAA assessor who provided us with some really good tips. To sort of summarize a couple of those things, the first thing really is to make sure you are responding to the topic, and that is for both the comparative and the text response essay. In every single VCAA report for English and EAL, they are pretty quick to mention the fact that students do come in with sort of these pre-prepared responses and pre-prepared essays. That is not the way to go about it. Of course, you're going to have to memorize particular quotes and examples, but you really can't afford to deviate away from the topic. They really want you to focus on ideas rather than, say, characters, which is why topic sentences are going to be really important. Ideas are similar to themes. They have been really strong on this wording of ideas rather than themes, but they pretty much mean the same thing. They also want you to continually compare the texts and looking at both similarities and differences, as we mentioned before. And no, that's not a mistake. Responding to the topic is really, really important. That's why we've mentioned it twice here. So remember, you need to read the question and answer the question. RTFQ, ATFQ. Once again, if you're not too sure what the F stands for, just have a think about it. I'm sure it'll come to you pretty soon. So let's have a look at introductions, and these are pretty similar to text responses as well. So we need to make sure we are addressing all aspects of the topic. Sometimes as well, the topic may contain quotations. Now it's up to you when you want to use these. Personally, I like them to be used in the main body paragraph somewhere. Please treat them as a free quotation. Do not ignore them. Sometimes they will come with a theme or idea. In fact, sometimes the essay topic will come with two themes or ideas. So again, make sure you address both of these. And to ensure you aren't repeating yourself over and over again, use synonyms. Don't try to be too complex with this though, because it might impact on what you are trying to say. But again, make sure you do bring a dictionary into your SACs and your exams. You want to make sure you are also outlining your arguments or ideas for discussion. Pretty much we're looking at having your topic sentences within your introduction somewhere. Of course, we don't want to repeat ourselves, so it's all about the wording for that. Bring in context information if possible. I think the introduction is often a nice way to do that. Of course, you're more than welcome to do this as well in your main body to showcase to the examiner or the marker that you're very much aware of when this text was written and or when this text was set, which of course those dual contexts of the Crucible. And the last thing, of course, is to make sure you have clear and fluent expression. That is so important. Don't forget as well, as we mentioned in the other video, that your assessors, your exam assessors, are going to read sort of your first introduction and a bit of your first main body paragraph, and they're going to sort of put your essay in either the lower, the middle, or the upper range. So your introduction is really important, that it is really clear. So when it comes to the main body paragraph, you've seen this table before a couple of times already. Again, it's up to you how you want to go about this. The main thing to remember is, of course, that your topic sentence and your linking sentence must cover both texts. Following this, it's up to sort of you. I like to talk about one text then the other and compare either a similarity or a difference. Then whatever I don't mention, be it the similarity or the difference, I mention just before my linking sentence, weaving that in a little bit more fluently than say I did before. Again, to start with, my advice to students would be don't worry about that fourth part, that green part. Focus on discussing both texts, either a similarity or a difference. Once you gain confidence in terms of your knowledge of the text and your ability to write a comparative paragraph, then you can bring in that other section to add complexity to your piece. But again, this is a really challenging piece of writing or response to write the comparative. There's so much evidence you can pick from. There are so many ways you can really go about it. So for me, just to start with, again, making sure our topic sentences and our links cover both texts, and what you do in the middle is up to you. Just remember, we want to weight both texts equally. Let's have a look at two examples. We'll look at example 1 now. Let's see if you can tell what the student's strengths are and what their weaknesses are. The dressmaker and the Crucible both highlight the key theme of judgment. John Proctor is continuously judged by those around him. His wife Elizabeth judges him because of his affair with Abigail, while Hale also judges him for not being able to recite the 10 Commandments. Danforth is another powerful figure that judges John Proctor after hearing Mary Warren talk and believing that he did have an affair with Abigail after Elizabeth came to court. It is clear that John Proctor is judged a lot. Similarly, Tilly is also judged by those around her, including Evan Pettyman, Beulah, and Miss Dim, who calls her slut, murderer, and bastard. Evan Pettyman even spits on her. In the end, this is what drives Tilly to seek revenge on the town and burns it down. John Proctor, on the other hand, sacrifices his life because he is unfairly judged and refuses to lie. As you can see, it is clear that judgment is in both towns and is a negative aspect. So, think about what this student did right to start with. And what I will say is they have discussed both texts, and their topic sentence and their link also sort of cover both texts. But really, the vocab needs to be improved a little bit. The word judgment is used, or judges is used, a lot, and I mean a lot. It's used far too frequently here. This is where synonyms are really important. Don't get me wrong, it's really good to see that they are focusing on that key idea and that key theme throughout. However, they need to be a little bit more complex in the way they analyze it. And that's the other thing. There's very little analysis really here. There's lots of evidence. Sometimes it's simply though plot retell. We want to be a bit more detailed and go into more depth with that. Remember, we want to analyze rather than summarize. You'll notice there are no quotations for the Crucible, which obviously is going to be really important, and there's only a couple of quotes for the Crucible. Again, they tried to compare again towards the end, which isn't a bad thing, but overall, we'd be putting this in the lower range, but the areas where this student could improve are pretty clear, and I think with more practice, with more writing, and with a more detailed knowledge of the text, they could possibly improve to be in that middle range without too much effort. So let's have a look at example number 2. Both texts explore the lack of freedom and individuality due to oppressive and insular communities. In The Crucible, the girls hide their true identities in Salem and only dance in the forest where abominations are done. The restrictive nature of Puritanism prevents them from being unique and shapes them into collectivists when dancing in the forest is considered as unnatural. The hysteria of the supernatural evil in Salem causes the town to turn a blind eye to logic and instead believe in wild claims, prompting the girls to conform to the religious attitudes and blame others to protect themselves, claiming they want the light of God. Similarly, in The Dressmaker, the need to conform stems from a fear of judgment, resulting in a lack of freedom. It is starkly described through the characterisation of Sergeant Farrett, who has knowledge about haute couture as he recognises Tilly's outfits. Italian boots, her trousers definitely not serge, and likes to dress in skirts. As he tolerates the vindictive and malicious Dungatar residents, he only reveals his true identity when he was alone in his house. When outside, he wears the same navy trousers, socks and shoes in order to adhere to the conservative values around masculinity of 1950s Australian society. While Miller and Ham endorse individualism, they also condemn judgment and blind prejudice. So already we can tell this is a bit of a step up from the previous example, and we will be looking at this as either a middle range or the lower end of the upper range, and I'll explain why in a little bit. So once again, we've got clear topic sentences and links that cover both texts, and the idea in this paragraph is consistent throughout. There's a lot more analysis as well compared to summary of the previous paragraph, and you'll notice that they've also looked to discuss the contexts of both the settings and also analyse some of the language used as well. Now, if I wanted to improve on this paragraph, I would mention a little bit more comparison at the end just before my link, and maybe compare a difference in terms of the judgment within both towns. Here you could look at, say, John Proctor, for example, or potentially Tilly as well. Or you could also talk about the outcome, what happened to both towns following these incidents. But again, it's a pretty solid paragraph that is really consistent in terms of the way it's analysed the key idea. So we've spoken about vocabulary a few times, and again, this is an area where you can be pretty explicit. You'll see the connectives on the left-hand side. It's always good to have these in your back pocket. So for similarities, similarly, in the same way, and likewise are three of many you could use. And with the differences, we've gone with in contrast, conversely, and on the other hand. But again, the list doesn't end here. What I've also done is popped in a couple of verbs, which I think are really useful to use in those connective sentences. For the similarities, I've gone with echoes, parallels, and reflects. And for differences, I've gone with challenges, condemns, and opposes. Now again, these lists are far from complete, and I would encourage all of you to form your own verb list, because there's at least 8 to 10 that I can think of off the top of my head, and they're really useful once again to show that you're able to be really expressive, but also using comparative vocab, not just in those connective phrases which so many students do. It's a way that again you can make your essay stand out that little bit more. So, conclusions. I'm not the biggest fan of conclusions. Sometimes I don't think they're necessarily needed. We know that VCAA don't really care about conclusions in analysing argument essays, but they definitely want one for your comparison and for your text response. So, my idea is just simply restate your contention and your ideas and avoid spending too much time on this. 1 or 2 sentences is absolutely okay, and you should not preference your conclusion over your main body paragraphs. As you can tell by the criteria, your main body paragraphs are where all your analysis is going to be, so this is what you should be focusing on. Again, a 2-sentence conclusion is okay. You shouldn't be bringing in any new information in there anyway, and it should really be a summary of your overall essay. Perhaps, if you wanted to expand on it, you might close your conclusion on, say, your overarching point, or what is the main point of your whole essay. Your best piece of analysis or your best idea perhaps would be a nice way to finish off your conclusion. But again, I wouldn't be worrying too much about this. So I've been asked a couple of times, how can I study for the comparison? I've got 2 massive books. I possibly can't know every single word in all of them. So what are the best ways to study, Jim? The first thing I would say is to read the text as many times as possible. Hopefully you've read it at least twice. I think 3 times is really good. Hopefully you've got some annotations in there. So even a skim would be really useful, particularly in the lead up to SACS and the exam. Build an idea or an example bank and refer to it while you are writing essays to start with. Of course, you're not allowed this in your exam, but it's a really good way to, I guess, condense the amount of evidence you need to remember or retain. So again, it might be going through the key themes and looking at 2 examples from each text. One might be a really obvious example, say through a protagonist, and the second one might be through a secondary character. Again, to show you've got those unique interpretations. You might also put in a literary device or a stylistic or structural feature in there as well, and perhaps even some context information that you can relate to. You should definitely be writing and seeking feedback. Particularly with this, it's a really pertinent point. This is a really sophisticated piece of writing, a comparative essay. They're not easy to do. They take a long time, especially your first couple. So please do write as much as you can. Even main body paragraphs. Write a couple of paragraphs on the key themes and the key ideas that you've got as a way to start. I also suggest you read sample essays to gain ideas and also look at vocab. Again, I'm very wary of VCAA. I've said it last year as well. That they want students to avoid simply replicating what they find in study guides or videos online, say for example, which is why I'm very surfacey in my analysis. And I definitely encourage you again to go that next step and to find those more unique interpretations. The last thing I would say in terms of studying would be to form a study group to discuss the texts. I think as an individual, it's a really good idea to focus on writing, and then with your mates, get together and discuss the texts. We all look at the Crucible and the Dressmaker in different ways, and you might find, again, different perspectives, different ideas that you hadn't thought of before just by talking to your mates. So a study group is always a really good idea. All right, it's over to you. I would definitely be encouraging you to write paragraphs based on the key ideas. Think about the comparative structure, and to start with, I would be focusing really on just one similarity or one difference from both texts. And once you grow in confidence, starting to integrate more comparison within those paragraphs so that you've got one similarity and one difference for each idea or each paragraph. Read last year's VCAA exam report. Identify and annotate the different aspects of each paragraph. Now, these will not be based on the Crucible and the Dressmaker. They're based on other texts. But again, it's a really good insight into what VCAA are looking at. And to those exclusive subscribers, if you haven't already, please check out the video from last week where we interviewed a VCAA examiner, because that's also really good insight. Start building that idea example bank. Again, it's really useful in terms of it provides you with a way to, I guess, condense the evidence that you want to focus on. And it's also a really helpful revision resource or revision tool. And it's a really good tool to have with you as you're writing your essays or paragraphs as well. The last thing, of course, is to communicate with your teacher, because they are your #1 resource. They want you to achieve and succeed just as much as you are. And they thrive on reading your work and providing feedback in order to help you grow as students and as writers. So make sure you're communicating with them, particularly in 2020 as we are in remote learning. But that's all from me today. I'll be back in a couple of days' time with another video on essay writing, this time looking at how to approach an essay topic, providing you with some tips and some, I guess, strategies on how to handle that. But until next time, I've been Jim Session, and this has been the 6Ps podcast, reminding you that proper prior preparation prevents poor performance.